Learn English through stories F39 PDF. Adapted and modified by Kulwant Singh Sandhu. Contents: 1. No room for a leopard. 2. A tiger in the house. 3. To see a tiger. 4. Grammar page. 1. No room for a leopard. I first saw the leopard when I was crossing the small stream at the bottom of the hill. The ravine was so deep that for most of the day it remained in shadow. This encouraged many birds and animals to emerge from cover during the hours of daylight. Few people ever passed that way, only milkmen and charcoal burners from the surrounding villages. As a result, the ravine had become a little haven for wildlife, one of the few natural sanctuaries left near Mussoorie. Below my cottage was a forest of oak and maple and Himalayan rhododendron. A narrow path twisted its way down through the trees, over an open ridge where red sorrel grew wild, and then down steeply through a tangle of wild raspberries, creeping vines, and slender wrangle bamboo. At the bottom of the hill, a path led onto a grassy verge surrounded by wild dog roses. The streams ran close by the verge, tumbling over smooth pebbles, over rock worn yellow with age, on its way to the plains and to the Little Song River and finally to the sacred Ganga. Nearly every morning, and sometimes during the day, I heard the cry of the barking deer. And in the evening, walking through the forest, I disturbed parties of Kalish pheasants. The birds went gliding into the ravines on open, motionless wings. I saw pine martens and a handsome red fox. I recognized the footprints of a bear. As I had not come to take anything from the jungle, the birds and animals soon grew accustomed to my face. Or possibly they recognized my footsteps. After some time, my approach did not disturb them. A spotted forktail, which at first used to fly away, now remained perched on a boulder in the middle of the stream while I got across by means of other boulders only a few yards away. The langurs in the oak and rhododendron trees, who would at first go leaping through the branches at my approach, now watched me with some curiosity as they munched on the tender green shoots of the oak. The young ones scuffled and wrestled like boys, while their parents groomed each other's coats, stretching themselves out on the sunlit hillside, beautiful animals with slim waists and long sinewy legs and tails full of character. But one evening as I passed, I heard them chattering in the trees, and I was not the cause of their excitement. As I crossed the stream and began climbing the hill, the grunting and chattering increased, as though the langurs were trying to warn me of some hidden danger. A shower of pebbles came rattling down the steep hillside, and I looked up to see a sinewy orange-gold leopard poised on a rock about 20 feet above me. It was not looking towards me, but had its head thrust attentively forward in the direction of the ravine. It must have sensed my presence, because it slowly turned its head and looked down at me. It seemed a little puzzled at my presence there, and when, to give myself courage, I clapped my hands sharply, the leopard sprang away into the thickets, making absolutely no sound as it melted into the shadows. I had disturbed the animal in its quest for food, but a little later I heard the quickening cry of a barking deer as it fled through the forest. The hunt was still on. The leopard, like other members of the cat family, is nearing extinction in India, and I was surprised to find one so close to Mussoorie. Probably the deforestation that had been taking place in the surrounding hills had driven the deer into this green valley, and the leopard, naturally, had followed. It was some weeks before I saw the leopard again, although I was often made aware of its presence. A dry, rasping cough sometimes gave it away. At times I felt certain that I was being followed. And once, when I was late getting home, I was startled by a family of porcupines running about in a clearing. I looked around nervously and saw two bright eyes staring at me from a thicket. I stood still, my heart banging away against my ribs. Then the eyes danced away, and I realized they were only fireflies. In May and June, when the hills were brown and dry, It was always cool and green, near the stream where ferns, maidenhair, and long grasses continued to thrive. One day I found the remains of a barking deer that had been partially eaten. I wondered why the leopard had not hidden the remains of his meal, and decided that he had been disturbed while eating. Then, climbing the hill, I met a party of shikaris resting beneath the oaks. They asked me if I had seen a leopard. I said I had not. They said they knew there was a leopard in the forest. Leopard skins, they told me, were selling in Delhi at over 1,000 rupees each. Of course, there was a ban on the export of its skins, but they gave me to understand that there were ways and means. I thanked them for their information and moved on, feeling uneasy and disturbed. The shikaris had seen the carcass of the deer and the leopard's pug marks, and they kept coming to the forest. Almost every evening I heard their guns banging away, for they were ready to fire at almost everything. "There's a leopard about," they told me. "You should carry a gun." "I don't have one," I said. There were fewer birds to be seen, and even the langurs had moved on. The red fox did not show itself, and the pine martens, who had earlier become bold, now dashed into hiding at my approach. The smell of one human is like the smell of any other. I thought no more of the men. My attitude towards them was similar to the attitude of the denizens of the forest. They were men, unpredictable, and to be avoided if possible. One day after crossing the stream, I climbed Peri Tibba, a bleak, scrub-covered hill where no one lived. This was a stiff undertaking, because there was no path to the top, and I had to scramble up a precipitous rock face with the help of rocks and roots, which were apt to come away in my groping hand. But at the top was a plateau with a few pine trees, their upper branches catching the wind and humming softly. There I found the ruins of what must have been the first settlers. Just a few piles of rubble now overgrown with weeds, sorrel, dandelion, and nettles. As I walked through the roofless ruins, I was struck by the silence that surrounded me, the absence of birds and animals, and the sense of complete desolation. The silence was so absolute that it seemed to be shouting in my ears. But there was something else of which I was becoming increasingly aware, the strong feline odor of one of the cat family. I paused and looked about. I was alone. There was no movement of dry leaf or loose stone. The ruins were, for the most part, open to the sky. Their rotting rafters had collapsed and joined together to form a low passage, like the entrance to a mine. This dark cavern seemed to lead down. The smell was stronger when I approached this spot, so I stopped again and waited there, wondering if I had discovered the lair of the leopard, wondering if the animal was now at rest after a night's hunt. Perhaps it was crouched there in the dark, watching me, recognizing me, knowing me as a man who walked alone in the forest without a weapon. I like to think that he was there and that he knew me, and that he acknowledged my visit in the friendliest way, by ignoring me altogether. Perhaps I had made him confident, too careless, too trusting of the human in his midst. I did not venture any further. I did not seek physical contact, or even another glimpse of that beautiful sinewy body. Springing from rock to rock, it was his trust I wanted, and I think he gave it to me. But did the leopard, trusting one man, make the mistake of bestowing his trust on others? Did I, by casting out all fear, my own fear and the leopard's protective fear, leave him defenseless? Because next day, coming up the path from the stream, shouting and beating their drums, were the shikaris. They had a long bamboo pole across their shoulder, and slung from the pole, feet up, head down, was the lifeless body of the leopard. It had been shot in the neck and in the head. "We told you there was a leopard," they shouted, in great good humor. "Isn't he a fine specimen?" "Yes," I said. "He was a beautiful leopard." I walked home through the silent forest. It was very silent, almost as though the birds and animals knew their trust had been violated. I remembered the lines of a poem by D.H. Lawrence, and as I climbed the steep and lonely path to my home, the words beat out their rhythm in my mind. There was room in the world for a mountain lion and me. 2. A tiger in the house. Timothy, the tiger cub, was discovered by grandfather on a hunting expedition in the Terry jungle near Dara. Grandfather was no shikari, but as he knew the forests of the Siwalik Hills better than most people, he was persuaded to accompany the party. It consisted of several very important persons from Delhi, to advise on the terrain and the direction the beaters should take once a tiger had been spotted. The camp itself was sumptuous. 7 large tents, one for each shikari, a dining tent, and a number of servants' tents. The dinner was very good, as grandfather admitted afterwards. It was not often that one saw hot water plates, finger glasses, and 7 or 8 courses in a tent in the jungle. But that was how things were done in the days of the viceroys. There were also some 15 elephants, 4 of them with howdahs for the shikaris, and the others specially trained for taking part in the beat. The sportsmen never saw a tiger, nor did they shoot anything else, though they saw a number of deer, peacock, and wild boar. They were giving up all hope of finding a tiger and were beginning to shoot at jackals, when grandfather, strolling down the forest path at some distance from the rest of the party, discovered a little tiger about 18 inches long, hiding among the intricate roots of a banyan tree. Grandfather picked him up and brought him home after the camp had broken up. He had the distinction of being the only member of the party to have bagged any game, dead or alive. At first, the tiger cub, who was named Timothy by grandmother, was brought up entirely on milk given to him in a feeding bottle by our cook, Maymout. But the milk proved too rich for him, and he was put on a diet of raw mutton and cod liver oil, to be followed later by a more tempting diet of pigeons and rabbits. Timothy was provided with 2 companions, Toto the monkey, who was bold enough to pull the young tiger by the tail, and then climb up the curtains if Timothy lost his temper, and a small mongrel puppy found on the road by grandfather. At first, Timothy appeared to be quite afraid of the puppy and darted back with a spring if it came too near. He would make absurd dashes at it with his large forepaws and then retreat to a ridiculously safe distance. Finally, he allowed the puppy to crawl on his back and rest there. One of Timothy's favorite amusements was to stalk anyone who would play with him, and so when I came to live with grandfather, I became one of the tiger's favorites. With a crafty look in his glittering eyes, and his body crouching, he would creep closer and closer to me, suddenly making a dash for my feet, rolling over on his back and kicking with delight, and pretending to bite my ankles. He was by this time the size of a full-grown retriever, and when I took him out for walks, people on the road would give us a wide berth. When he pulled hard on his chain, I had difficulty in keeping up with him. His favorite place in the house was the drawing room, and he would make himself comfortable on the long sofa, reclining there with great dignity and snarling at anybody who tried to get him off. Timothy had clean habits, and would scrub his face with his paws exactly like a cat. He slept at night in the cook's quarters, and was always delighted at being let out by him in the morning. One of these days, declared grandmother in her prophetic manner, we are going to find Timothy sitting on Maymout's bed, and no sign of the cook except his clothes and shoes. Of course, it never came to that, but when Timothy was about 6 months old, a change came over him. He grew steadily less friendly. When out for a walk with me, he would try to steal away to stalk a cat or someone's pet Pekingese. Sometimes at night we would hear frenzied cackling from the poultry house, and in the morning there would be feathers lying all over the veranda. Timothy had to be chained up more often. And finally, when he began to stalk Maymout about the house with what looked like villainous intent, grandfather decided it was time to transfer him to a zoo. The nearest zoo was at Lucknow, 200 miles away. Reserving a first-class compartment for himself and Timothy, no one would share a compartment with them. Grandfather took him to Lucknow, where the zoo authorities were only too glad to receive as a gift a well-fed, and fairly civilized tiger. About 6 months later, when my grandparents were visiting relatives in Lucknow, Grandfather took the opportunity of calling at the zoo to see how Timothy was getting on. I was not there to accompany him, but I heard all about it when he returned to Dara. Arriving at the zoo, Grandfather made straight for the particular cage in which Timothy had been interned. The tiger was there, crouched in a corner, full-grown, and with a magnificent striped coat. "Hello, Timothy," said Grandfather, and climbing the railing with ease, he put his arm through the bars of the cage. The tiger approached the bars and allowed Grandfather to put both hands around his head. Grandfather stroked the tiger's forehead and tickled his ear, and whenever he growled, smacked him across the mouth, which was his old way of keeping him quiet. He licked Grandfather's hands and only sprang away when a leopard in the next cage snarled at him. Grandfather shooed the leopard away, and the tiger returned to lick his hands. But every now and then the leopard would rush at the bars, and the tiger would slink back to his corner. A number of people had gathered to watch the reunion when a keeper pushed his way through the crowd and asked Grandfather what he was doing. "I'm talking to Timothy," said Grandfather. "Weren't you here when I gave him to the zoo 6 months ago?" "I haven't been here very long," said the surprised keeper. "Please continue your conversation, but I have never been able to touch him myself. He is always very bad-tempered." "Why don't you put him somewhere else?" suggested Grandfather. "That leopard keeps frightening him. I'll go and see the superintendent about it." Grandfather went in search of the superintendent of the zoo, but found that he had gone home early, and so after wandering about the zoo for a little while, he returned to Timothy's cage to say goodbye. It was beginning to get dark. He had been stroking and slapping Timothy for about 5 minutes when he found another keeper observing him with some alarm. Grandfather recognized him as the keeper who had been there when Timothy had first come to the zoo. "You remember me," said Grandfather. "Now why don't you transfer Timothy to another cage, away from this stupid leopard?" "But sir," stammered the keeper, "it is not your tiger." I know," said Grandfather testily. "I realize he is no longer mine, but you might at least take a suggestion or two from me." "I remember your tiger very well," said the keeper. "He died 2 months ago." "Died," exclaimed Grandfather. "Yes, sir, of pneumonia. This tiger was trapped in the hills only last month, and he is very dangerous." Grandfather could think of nothing to say. The tiger was still licking his arm, with increasing relish. Grandfather took what seemed to him an age to withdraw his hand from the cage. With his face near the tiger's, he mumbled, "Good night, Timothy," and giving the keeper a scornful look, walked briskly out of the zoo. 3. To see a tiger. Mr. Kaswari drove me out to the forest rest house in his jeep, told me he'd be back in 2 days, and left me in the jungle. The caretaker of the rest house, a retired Indian Army corporal, made me a cup of tea. "You have come to see the animals, sir?" "Yes," I said, looking around the clearing in front of the house, where a few domestic fowls scrabbled in the dust. "Will I have to go far?" "This is the best place, sir," said the caretaker. "See, the river is just below." A stream of clear mountain water ran through a shady glade of sal and shisham trees about 50 yards from the house. "The animals come at night," said the caretaker. "You can sit in the veranda with a cup of tea and watch them. You must be very quiet, of course." "Will I see a tiger?" I asked. "I've come to see a tiger." "Perhaps the tiger will come, sir," said the caretaker with a tolerant smile. "He will do his best, I am sure." He made me a simple lunch of rice and lentils, flavored with a mango pickle. I spent the afternoon with a book taken from the rest house bookshelf. The small library hadn't been touched for over 20 years, and I had to make my choice from Marie Corelli, P.C. Wren, and Early Wodehouse. I plumped for a Wodehouse, love among the chickens. A peacock flaunted its tail feathers on the lawn, but I was not distracted. I had seen plenty of peacocks. When it grew dark, I took up my position in the veranda, on an old cane chair. Bag Singh, the caretaker, brought me dinner on a brass thali, with 2 different vegetables in separate kataras. The chapatis came in relays, brought hot from the kitchen by Bag Singh's 10-year-old son. Then, sustained by more tea sweet and milky, I began my vigil. It took an hour for Bag Singh's family to settle down for the night in their outhouse. Their pie dog stood outside, barking at me for half an hour, before he too fell asleep. The moon came up over the foothills, and the stream could be seen quite clearly. And then a strange sound filled the night air. Not the roar of a tiger, nor the sawing of a leopard, but a rising crescendo of noise, work, 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 issuing from the muddy banks near the stream. All the frogs in the jungle seemed to have gathered there that night. They must have been having a sort of old boys' reunion, because everyone seemed to have something to say for himself. The speeches continued for about an hour. Then the meeting broke up, and silence returned to the forest. A jackal slunk across the clearing. A puff of wind brushed through the trees. I was almost asleep when a cicada burst into violent music in a nearby tree. I started and stared out at the silver moon-green stream, but no animals came to drink that night. The next evening, Bag Singh offered to sit up with me. He placed a charcoal burner on the veranda and topped it with a large basin of tea. "Whenever you feel sleepy, sir, I'll give you a glass of tea." Did we hear a panther, or was it someone sawing wood? The sounds are similar in the distance. The frogs started up again. The old boys must have brought their wives along this time, because instead of speeches there was general conversation, exactly like the natter of a cocktail party. By morning I had drunk over 15 cups of tea. Out of respect for my grandfather, a pioneer tea planter in India, I did not complain. Bag Singh made me an English breakfast, toast, fried eggs, and more tea. The third night passed in much the same way, except that Bag Singh's son stayed up with us and drank his quota of tea. In the morning, Mr. Kishore came for me in his jeep. "Did you see anything?" "A jackal," I said. "Never mind, you'll have better luck next time. Of course, the jungles aren't what they used to be." I said goodbye to Bag Singh and got into the jeep. We had gone barely 100 yards along the forest road when Mr. Kishore brought the jeep to a sudden, jolting halt. Right in the middle of the road, about 30 yards in front of us, stood a magnificent, full-grown tiger. The tiger didn't roar. He didn't even snarl. But he gave us what appeared to be a quick, disdainful glance, and then walked majestically across the road and into the jungle. "What luck!" exclaimed Mr. Kishore. "You can't complain now, can you? You've seen your tiger?" "Yes," I said. 3 sleepless nights, and I've seen it in broad daylight." "Never mind," said Mr. Kishore. "If you're tired, I know just the thing for you, a nice cup of tea." I think it was Malcolm Muggeridge who said that the only real Englishmen left in the world were to be found in India. 4. Grammar page.